After creating the islands of Japan, Izanagi and Izanami looked upon their creation. But the land was still silent and bare. To make it a living world, they decided to give birth to the gods of nature.
Our lands are complete, Izanagi. Now let us bring life, wind, and color to this world.
Yes, Izanami. Let us give birth to the deities who will protect and nurture these lands.
First came Shinatsuhiko, the god of wind, who blew away the morning mists. Then came Owatatsumi, the god of the sea, and Oyamatsumi, the god of the mountains. Trees grew, rivers flowed, and the islands were blessed with abundant life. Over 30 powerful gods were born, transforming the world into a paradise. But then came the final deity. Izanami gave birth to Kagutsuchi, the god of fire. But Kagutsuchi was born wrapped in fierce, burning flames.
Ah, Izanagi, the heat, it burns.
Izanami, hang on. Hold my hand.
The birth of the fire god severely burned Izanami. Despite her immense suffering, even from her last breaths and tears, more gods were born, but her body could not withstand the burning wounds.
My beloved Izanami, why must I lose you for the sake of a single child? Please, open your eyes.
Yomi, the underworld, the land of the dead. Grief-stricken and filled with rage, Izanagi wept tears that became fresh springs. Left alone in the living world, Izanagi made a desperate decision. He would journey into the dark underworld to bring his beloved wife back.
Imagine for a second, like, you have the power to build a perfect, vibrant world entirely from scratch. You're just sitting there at the literal drawing board of reality.
A pretty good place to be.
Right. It's the ultimate sandbox. So you paint in these sweeping mountain ranges, you fill up the deep oceans, you set the wind in motion to, rustle the leaves of the very first forests.
Mm-hmm.
And it is pristine. It's this absolute masterpiece of infinite blossoming life. But then, right at the peak of this beautiful creative flow, you accidentally create the one specific thing that breaks the system.
The ultimate bug in the code.
Exactly. You introduce something so volatile, so intense, that it brings the concept of permanent consequence and death itself into your flawless world.
Which is exactly what happens in the ancient Japanese myth of the Kami-UMI, the birth of the gods.
Yeah, so today we're going on a deep dive into this specific, super dramatic turning point.
Yeah.
The exact moment where absolute creation collides with devastating tragedy through the birth of just one single deity, Kagutsuchi, the god of fire.
We are standing at the exact precipice here, where a universe of, infinite possibilities suddenly becomes bound by mortality.
It's heavy.
Very. The text we are exploring today, it isn't just an origin story for the physical geography of Japan. It is the foundational bedrock of a cultural consciousness.
Right.
It's charting the emotional and philosophical limits of what it means to exist, to create, and ultimately to lose.
So let's set the scene for everyone listening, because to really feel the crushing weight of this tragedy, you have to understand the sheer scale of the beauty that came right before it.
You have to know what's at stake.
Yeah. So our creator deities, Izanagi and Izanami, they had already formed the physical islands of Japan. That was step one.
Right, the land masses themselves.
But a physical island is just rock and dirt. It's totally dormant. So they move into what's called the Kami-UMI phase. They start breathing actual dynamic life into these barren rocks.
They give birth to over 30 different deities representing the natural elements.
It's 30. That is, that's a massive undertaking.
Well, consider the overwhelming silence of a world before the wind is born.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Just static rocks suspended, waiting. Izanagi and Izanami aren't just engaging in structural engineering here. They are cultivating a living, breathing ecosystem.
Like toggling the switch from off to on.
Precisely. They bring forth Shinatsuhiko, the god of wind, who introduces the invisible driving currents of air and weather.
Okay.
Then they give birth to Owatatsumi, the god of the sea, wrapping those barren shores in vast rhythmic tides. And they birth Oyamatsumi, the god of the mountains, thrusting those towering peaks up into the sky to define the Japanese topography.
When I try to visualize this phase of the Kami-UMI, my mind immediately jumps to modern video game design.
Oh, really? How so?
Well, think about booting up a massive next-generation video game engine, like Unreal Engine 5 or something.
Yeah.
At first, you just have the blank map. The geometry is laid out, the islands are placed, but it is totally static, eerily quiet.
The dormant rock we talked about.
Right. But then, the developers start toggling on the environmental physics systems. They check the box for wind dynamics, and suddenly the digital forest starts swaying.
I see where you're going with this.
They toggle the water physics, and the oceans start foaming, crashing against the cliffs. They turn on the terrain generation, and the tectonic plates buckle to form mountains. It's like watching a dead rendering suddenly wake up, take its first breath, and become a vibrant, functioning world.
That is actually a very apt way to look at it.
Right. That is essentially what Izanagi and Izanami are doing. They are booting up the world engine of Japan.
While I highly doubt Izanagi and Izanami were sitting behind a glowing monitor dragging sliders to adjust the weather,
Hey, you never know.
the instinct behind your analogy is completely sound. It perfectly captures the transition from static architecture to a volatile moving system.
Yeah.
But we do have to peel away the digital metaphor for a second to look at the visceral, animistic reality of this worldview. In Shinto belief, they aren't just turning on a physics engine.
Because it's not just code.
Exactly. Nature is never just scenery in this context. It is never just an environmental backdrop for human drama to play out against. Every single element is a living deity, a kami.
It's this hyper-animistic reality. Everything has a pulse, like an intention, a consciousness.
Which means the wind blowing through the ancient cedar trees isn't merely a meteorological shift in air pressure. It is the conscious movement of Shinatsuhiko passing by.
The wind god himself.
Right. The ocean isn't just a massive body of salt water reacting to lunar gravity. It is the physical presence and will of Owatatsumi.
Man, that makes the world feel so incredibly alive.
It does, and this intrinsic deep reverence for nature sets the stakes for the Kami-UMI. It is a time of unadulterated harmony. The world is expanding, blooming, finding its rhythm.
It's paradise, basically.
Izanagi and Izanami are completely absorbed in the ultimate joy of creators watching their masterpiece harmonize.
Which makes the ensuing rug pull so incredibly jarring.
Jarring is an understatement.
Yeah, I mean, you have these creators on an unparalleled winning streak, birthing harmonious nature gods, building this flawless ecosystem, and then bam, Izanami gives birth to Kagutsuchi, the fire god.
The turning point of the entire mythological canon.
Right.
Kagutsuchi is born, but unlike the gentle sea or the sweeping wind, he is composed entirely of pure, searing flame.
And because he's made of literal radiating fire, the physical act of giving birth to him is catastrophic. The text describes Izanami suffering severe fatal burns from the inside out.
The imagery is intentionally horrific.
It's brutal.
It is. The mother of all creation, the divine entity who just breathed the mountains and the oceans into existence, is brought to her knees in blinding agony by her own child. It is a violent, traumatic rupture in the fabric of their perfect world.
I have to push back on the underlying logic of this myth for a second, though. I mean, I understand fire is important, but if Izanagi and Izanami are these supreme creator gods intentionally designing a flawless ecosystem, why include something so uniquely dangerous?
What do you mean?
Well, you create the wind, the system is fine. You create the sea, the system flourishes. You create fire, and the system literally immolates the creator.
Ah, I see.
Usually we think of fire as the ultimate tool for progress, right?
Yeah.
It's the cheat code that allows early human civilization to survive the winter, cook food, forge metal, build empires.
Right.
But in this pristine universe, there are no humans needing to forge steel yet. It's just the gods. So why write the code of the universe to include the one volatile element that fundamentally destroys the divine architect? It feels entirely unnecessary.
You view fire as a tool for progress, which is a very modern anthropocentric lens.
Okay.
But to understand Kagutsuchi, you have to look at how early Japanese civilization actually experienced the flame. You call it a cheat code, but a cheat code implies mastery.
That's true.
Early humanity didn't master fire. They negotiated a highly volatile hostage situation with it.
Oh, wow. A hostage situation. Especially considering the sociology and architecture of early Japan.
Yeah.
We aren't talking about stone castles here.
Precisely. We are talking about wood, paper, thatch, and incredibly dense communities.
One spark and it's over.
Fire was the great differentiator. It provided the hearth, the warmth that kept a family alive through a freezing winter. But a single stray spark on a dry evening could, and frequently did, reduce a bustling, thriving city to ash in a matter of hours.
It's terrifying when you put it like that.
Fire is a blessing that demands absolute, terrifying respect because its default state is consumption.
It doesn't negotiate.
It cannot negotiate. And Kagutsuchi perfectly represents this dual nature. He is the Promethean spark of warmth, but he is also the inferno.
So he's not the villain, necessarily.
No, the myth isn't suggesting that fire is inherently evil, nor is it suggesting that Kagutsuchi maliciously attacked his mother. He didn't ask to be made a pure flame, he just is.
He's just existing.
Exactly. And the Japanese mythos acknowledges a profound truth here. A perfect, static world cannot change. Ecosystems require consumption to evolve.
Oh, I see.
Fire forces change. It is the inevitable introduction of entropy into an otherwise stagnant paradise.
So destruction was always baked into the recipe of creation.
It had to be.
Even so, the sheer mechanics of what happens next they blow my mind. You have Izanami, this beautiful creator goddess, writhing in unimaginable agony, her body fundamentally breaking down.
Yes.
Logically, in a moment of such intense physical trauma, you would expect the creative process to just hard crash. Like the engine should shut off, but it doesn't.
The creative force of the universe proves to be relentless. Even as she is dying, the creation continues.
It goes way beyond continuing. The trauma itself becomes the raw material for creation. And this is where the source text gets highly specific and incredibly visceral.
It does not hold back.
No, it doesn't.
Yeah.
It tells us that as Izanami is suffering these fatal burns, new deities are born from her vomit, her feces, and her urine. From the absolute sheer physical trauma of a body shutting down in agony, life is violently asserting itself.
It is an uncomfortable passage for many modern readers to digest. But if we analyze the specific kami that emerge from those bodily fluids, a brilliant, almost desperate biological mechanism reveals itself.
Right.
Do you know what those specific gods represent?
Let me look at my notes here. Okay. The gods born from her vomit represent metal and mines. The gods born from her feces represent clay and earth. And the god born from her urine represents fresh water and springs.
Now look at those three elements together in the context of what is currently killing her. Metal, clay, fresh water.
Wait a second. Fresh water extinguishes fire. Clay is literally the earth you use to build a kiln to contain and smother fire. Metal is the resilient material you forge using the heat of the fire.
The universe is desperately trying to synthesize a solution.
Her dying body is involuntarily generating an immune response.
Yes.
That is wild. The fire is destroying her, and her physical form is literally vomiting up the elements required to fight, contain, and survive the flame.
It is a stunning realization, isn't it?
She is building the tools to manage the trauma, even as the trauma kills her.
Exactly. Even in the throes of a violent death, the cosmic architecture isn't just randomly spawning gods. It is adapting. It is providing the exact environmental countermeasures needed to balance the destructive force of Kagutsuchi.
Wow.
The universe is trying to heal its own horrific burn.
That completely reframes the entire sequence for me. It's not just grotesque ancient imagery for shock value. It's a beautifully logical chain reaction of cause and effect.
And it doesn't stop there.
Right, because as her vital forces fade entirely, more kami are born from her final ragged breaths and from her tears of pain.
The universe is indiscriminately grabbing whatever raw material is present to generate life.
When the raw material was joy and architectural harmony, it made towering mountains and sweeping oceans. Now that the raw material is pure agony, it makes gods of sorrow and elemental containment.
Think about the philosophical weight of that concept. In the Shinto belief system, we established that every natural phenomenon contains a spirit, right?
Yeah, the animism.
But this takes animism into the deepest recesses of the human condition. It isn't just the majestic, beautiful parts of nature that are divine.
It's the ugly parts, too.
The involuntary bodily expressions of severe grief, the fading vital force of a dying breath, the bitter tears of physical agony, these too hold a divine spark.
It is so profound.
Life refuses to be paused by tragedy. It simply morphs, using the grief itself as the soil for new realities to take root.
And it isn't just Izanami's physical body doing this. When she finally succumbs to the burns and passes away, her partner, Izanagi, is left standing alone in the ashes of their perfect world.
He is completely shattered.
The myth tells us he falls to the ground and weeps bitterly over her ruined body. And as his tears hit the dirt boom, More deities are born.
More creation.
Literally, gods of sorrow and mourning spring up from the physical manifestation of his crying.
It is a profound psychological insight wrapped in the trappings of mythology.
How so?
When we experience deep, foundational loss, our grief never exists in a vacuum. It invariably changes the world around us. It creates new emotional landscapes, new realities that we and the people around us have to suddenly navigate.
That too.
Izanagi's tears aren't just salt water falling on barren rock. They are the physical manifestation of a love so deep that its violent severing reshapes the entire divine pantheon.
It's forcing a new ecosystem into existence, an ecosystem of mourning.
Which brings us to the defining threshold of this entire narrative, the moment Izanami stops breathing.
She passes away, and she descends to Yomi, the Japanese underworld, the land of the dead where everything rots and decays.
Until the birth of Kagutsuchi, this world was defined exclusively by infinite expansion.
Right, just life building on life.
It was an endless canvas of blossoming life with no concept of an ending. Izanami's passage to Yomi is the exact, definitive moment that mortality enters the universe. Time, decay, and consequence are suddenly active forces.
The tonal shift is absolute whiplash. Like if you were reading the ancient text straight through, you go from this serene, majestic world building creating the wind, the forests, the oceans, to a devastating, visceral, intensely personal tragedy.
It is incredibly sudden.
Suddenly, the infinite sandbox has boundaries. The rules of the universe have fundamentally changed forever. It's like observing a perfectly balanced, closed ecological loop and then suddenly watching irreversible entropy get injected directly into its center.
Yes.
The perfect system collapses into something deeply flawed and temporary.
The innocence of the world is entirely lost. The pristine ecosystem you described, your flawlessly running world engine, has been permanently corrupted by the introduction of death.
Yeah.
And the tragedy is that this corruption wasn't introduced by an invading demonic force. It was introduced by the very act of creation itself.
Wow.
The fire that was required to complete the natural world is exactly what burned it down.
Man. So, wrapping our heads around all of this, what do we actually walk away with? We started this deep dive watching the world wake up.
We did.
We saw the kami of the wind, the sea, and the mountains boot up the vibrant, pristine ecosystem of early Japan. We saw the creators at the height of their joy, and then we witnessed the brutal, unyielding nature of fire.
The volatile element of progress and warmth that inherently carries the inescapable curse of destruction.
Right. We saw how a creator's own body desperately tried to manufacture the clay and metal to contain that fire, and how ultimately the flames introduced grief, agony, and mortality into a previously immortal existence.
It operates as a masterclass in understanding that beauty and tragedy are inextricably linked, bound together by the same forces.
They're two sides of the same coin.
The very elements that give us life, warmth, and the capacity to build civilizations are the same elements that expose us to unpredictable loss and profound sorrow.
It's a heavy price.
Izanami's agonizing sacrifice wasn't a glitch in the cosmos. It was the heavy, unavoidable toll exacted for a fully realized, evolving world.
And it leaves our remaining creator, Izanagi, in an unimaginably dark place. The love of his immortal life, his co-architect of reality, has just been ripped away from him by the very universe they built together.
It is a devastating loss.
But if you think a god who birthed oceans is just going to sit back, cry a few tears, and accept this new, terrible rule of mortality, well, you are in for a wild ride.
He certainly does not just sit back.
Because this catastrophic tragedy perfectly sets the stage for our next deep dive. We're going to follow a grief-stricken, furious Izanagi as he decides to completely reject the rules of death.
A dangerous decision.
He journeys straight down into the rotting, pitch-black darkness of Yomi and attempts to drag his wife back to the land of the living.
It remains one of the most haunting, desperate, and psychologically complex journeys in all of global mythology. A true, unflinching descent into the shadows of grief.
We will unpack every terrifying step of that descent next time. But before we wrap up today, I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over as you go about your day. Think about the intricate, ruthless mechanics of the universe we just explored. If absolutely everything in nature is a living, intentional kami, and if fire, the exact element that brought death and entropy into the world, was birthed directly from the divine creator herself, does that mean destruction was a mistake?
A fascinating question.
Or does it mean that pain, loss, and eventually death were always intentional, deeply necessary components of the world's design from the very beginning? Could a world without the threat of the flame ever truly be considered alive? Think about it.
The brightest fires cast the longest shadows. Until next time, keep questioning the world around you.